Good morning, class. Welcome to the first episode of Digital Learning with Mr. Skrill, where we are going to review some very important topics that have to do with the 1920s and the Great Depression. Okay, so the last time I saw you, which feels like a really long time ago, we went over the Harlem Renaissance, and we went over the Great Migration, which was the mass movement of African Americans from southern states to the north, mostly to get away from lynching, but also to take economic opportunities in the factories. So remember, we said that there were 90% of African Americans before the Great Migration lived in the South, and by the time we hit the 1970s, it's closer to 50%. What we're going to talk about today, and you guys might have reviewed this a little bit with the video that Mr. Bukowski or Mrs. Carey showed you the other day, is how we get from the 1920s, which, as I said, was a lit decade, to the worst economic situation the United States has ever seen. So in the 1920s, there is this idea of consumerism. I'm going to try to post all these vocab words somewhere so you have them. Consumerism is really just the idea that Americans were buying lots of stuff. They were buying new household conveniences. They were buying stuff like vacuum cleaners and microwaves and radios. And America, for the first time, becomes a consumer culture. The problem is, not everybody had the money to buy these items. So a lot of times they would go and they would buy them on credit, which is really like the modern day equivalent of using a credit card. All right, you pay a little bit now and you pay a little bit every month, and eventually you get the product. Because everybody thought that this good economic time was here to stay, people were comfortable putting expensive items like Model T cars or radios or refrigerators on layaway or on credit with really no money to eventually pay them back. So what happens is the companies that are making these items are producing a ton of products, giving them away virtually for free, and never actually getting money for them. And we call this overproduction. The big companies like Ford, who was making the Model T car, and other companies were making these things so many of these items that they were never able to sell them for a high price. Imagine, guys, that I had 1,000 iPhones and we had our class and I was trying to sell them to you. Because I have so many iPhones, I have to lower the price to make sure you buy them. Because if I don't do that, they're going to become, then I'm never going to sell them and I'm going to lose all my money. Another big part of the 1920s is the idea of the stock market. So if you're paying attention to the news right now, you might hear every day that the stock market is crashing. What that means is that the stock market is going down. So the way the stock market works is people buy shares in companies. And if they think the company is going to do well, then they buy a share. And then as time goes on, the value of that share increases. If the people buying these shares or these parts of companies, if they are confident, the price is going to keep going up because people are trying to make money and they think that eventually they'll be able to sell their shares and make money. The problem is that a lot of people in the 1920s were buying these shares with borrowed money. And this is a term called buying on margin. Buying on margin means that you buy these shares of companies with borrowed money. So if you are ever expected to pay back for the money that you have, and the share does not become as valuable as you hope, that you are not going to be able to actually pay back these shares. So that brings us to October of 1929. October of 1929 is probably one of the most important days in American history. It is the day called Black Tuesday. And on Black Tuesday, the stock market crashes. So what happens is Americans start to see the value of the things they've invested money in go down. And to make sure they don't lose it all, they start to sell. And the more people that sell, the less and less the value is for everybody else's stocks. And what ends up happening is eventually the stock market crashes and everybody's stocks lose almost all their value. So what ends up happening after the stock market crashes is people literally run to the banks to get their money. But what the banks did was they invested people's money in the stock market. So our money was invested in the stock market. And then once the stock market crashes, the banks lost everybody's life savings. Can you imagine you show up to a bank, you expect your $1,000 to be there, and you're waiting in line and the bank says, sorry, we're out of money. Okay? So what does this mean for the country? The Great Depression, this leads to a time called the Great Depression, which lasted about 10 years. 10 years where Americans were in such dire economic situations that they were mostly all unemployed, standing on lines for food, etc. There were these things called bread lines, which were people that lined up to try to get any type of food they could. There were people were trying to sell any item they could in order to make them money. Like you have guys that are selling cars for like a tenth of what they were valued at because they needed to eat. It especially hits the middle part and the rural parts of the country hardest because not only is nobody buying the crops that they're selling, the farmers, but there was also a massive dust storm, a series of massive dust storms called the Dust Bowl, which killed all the crops and pretty much cut off the American food supply. So this is the situation in the 1930s. And in 1929, the president is a guy named Herbert Hoover. And Herbert Hoover, he believed that if we give money directly to people as a government to help them, that this will make them lazy and they won't want to work anymore. Unfortunately, people are mad at Hoover. You guys probably are seeing it right now with President Trump. When things go wrong, people blame the person in charge, even if that person had very little to do with what actually happened. So people are mad at Hoover, and they start to protest Hoover. They start to wear their pockets out of their pants to show off that they had no money. They called them Hoover flags. They were living in dens called Whovilles. They were just these makeshift shacks that were made out of cardboard because so many people lost their homes. And Hoover refuses to even give World War I veterans a bonus early and takes the drastic step with this group called the Bonus Army, where he sends the military in when they were coming in to ask for their money a little bit early. All right. So Hoover did not believe in direct aid. He believed in indirect aid, which means that the government gives money to a company. The company uses that money to make more money and invest it and create more product. And then they were able to hire people and people are able to work. So Hoover becomes a very unpopular guy as a result of the stock market crash of 1929. You might have heard Mayor de Blasio with this recent coronavirus epidemic call President Trump saying that he's acting like Herbert Hoover. And what that means is he believes that Trump is not managing the situation. Well, people were really desperate. At the peak of the Great Depression, unemployment was 25%. That means 1 out of every 4 Americans did not have a job. And it might not sound like that much, but to compare it to today, it's about 4%. So people needed jobs, people needed food, and when they had a chance to elect somebody else president in 1932, this guy named Franklin Roosevelt, who was the nephew of Teddy Roosevelt, please try not to get them confused, Franklin Roosevelt wins in large numbers. Franklin Roosevelt pretty much wins every state and becomes the president, and he promises to put money directly into the pockets of the American people. He wanted what we call direct aid. So if you're talking about, if we relate it to today, because we are in a very precarious economic situation, meaning precarious means a difficult economic situation because of this virus, this is the equivalent of the government literally passing a law yesterday that will give Americans $1,200 to try to help them get through this very difficult economic time. So FDR believes in direct aid, and his direct aid is going to be called the New Deal. So the New Deal we will discuss in our next video. but it is a very comprehensive and large program, many programs that are designed to fix the problems of the Great Depression. And they involve a lot of government giving people jobs, government giving people money, them literally paying people to build things for the government, such as bridges, infrastructure, and tunnels, and dams. And all of these programs are designed to try to fix the problems of the Great Depression. So what we're going to call is relief for the people that need it, reform to try to fix the problems that caused this, and recovery to try to make sure the country gets out of this Great Depression, which will last throughout most of the 1930s. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to try to edit this video so the big important vocab words pop up as I say it. Please make sure that you have done assignment number 1 and assignment number 2. Assignment number 2 will be pictures from the Great Depression and 2 songs. And we're really going to try to get a sense of what the Great Depression really meant for the average American during this really crazy time. Okay? So stay safe, everybody. Enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys later. Goodbye.